Hi, this is Nicholas Bell with IONCINEMA, here to review Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer, a new 4-part docu-series which will be available to stream on Netflix as of January 13, 2021, directed by Tiller Russell. So Night Stalker, of course, is a reference to what the media eventually termed the name of Richard Ramirez, who terrorized Southern California between San Francisco and Los Angeles from June of 1984 to August of 1985 before he was finally apprehended. The approach of this 4-part docuseries eventually reveals itself to be a piece of, it's an investigative procedural. It focuses mainly on Gil Carrillo and Frank Salerno, who were the team that eventually were integral in bringing Ramirez down. Carrillo, we kind of dive deepest into his background growing up in East LA in the 1960s, entering into the military, then working through the LA County Sheriff's Department, and then a decade after that becoming part of the homicide division, where he would be paired up with Frank Salerno, a very famous homicide detective because he helped crack the Hillside Strangler case several years earlier. But this really takes off on a chronological trajectory, if you will, beginning in March of 1985 after Ramirez's first documented killing spree in Los Angeles, and kind of how oscillating back and forth between these two investigators now, looking back with some reenactments that make this feel very overproduced, and snippets of these news anchors such as Tony Valdez, more importantly probably Laurel Erickson, who played an integral part in finding out about the shoe print and holding it over the heads of the investigators to so that she could score interviews with them. There also is a lot of due deference is tried to pay to the various victims, and there's one young woman who had been raped as a 6-year-old by Ramirez who relates her experience. There's also some adjacent relatives to some of the victims that are on hand to give testimony of their memories of this very troubling period. But overall, Russell spends kind of way too much time with Carrillo, who isn't really that interesting. He's certainly no Kathleen Zellner from Making of a Murderer, season 2, for instance, that really makes sense for why this was the entry point. It starts out on a very promising note, talking about Los Angeles in the early 1980s, this place where the traffic was under control, the Pope was visiting, the Queen was visiting, we had the Olympics, but there was this dark underbelly of things going on. But we never really quite get into that underbelly, and it's because I think they try to sidestep really delving into Ramirez as a person. It's not until the 4th episode where we get the briefest overview of a very, very troubling childhood, and upon his apprehension, some courtroom documentation, skirting around kind of the cult that became obsessed with Ramirez for various reasons. One, I think, because the charges against him, they actually didn't go forward with all of the things he did to children to kind of spare those victims, but I think that also played into the part of a kind of romanticized imaging of him. Of course, Ramirez, I don't believe is as celebrated cinematically as, say, like a Ted Bundy, a Jeffrey Dahmer, or Charles Manson, or various other ones, and I think it's because you can't get around the atrociousness of his crimes. But he was depicted recently in Ryan Murphy's American Horror Story 1984. Lou Diamond Phillips portrayed him in a Lifetime movie. And there's a 1989 television film, Manhunt, The Search for Night Stalker, with A. Martinez and Richard Jordan. But really, I'm getting into all that to say that this will leave you wanting more in all the ways that it doesn't satisfy all kinds of questions it brings up, such as pertaining to the ammunition that Ramirez was using, not to mention his motives for what he did or why he did it. And because of that, it creates this sense of dread in a very lazy way, because it tries to paint people, or him, as a person who's just simply evil incarnate. Which I don't believe for a minute. I think there are rational explanations that this should have spent at least an episode going into on that. And I think there's really way more material here that's left out. What I really wanted was for this to be like OJ Made in America. I really think that there was a way to get into the particular neighborhood Ramirez grew up in, law enforcement, news media, all of those things that played kind of a problem, the multi-jurisdictional issues with various LA divisions that played a part in the delay of Ramirez being apprehended. I just think that this will just whet your appetite to revisit a very troubling time. Even an interview with Tiller Russell talking about driving around in LA today, you can see bars on people's windows due to the fears that this caused, this very brief period in time. But that's not even brought up in there. That said, what I do like about it is, besides the opening sequence, really great soundtrack selection, although I was a little disappointed that the Bananarama creepy cover of Cruel Summer was not actually used in this, but I did discover Anne Clark, who is used effectively in some of the soundtrack selections. Overall, I would give Night Stalker 2.5 out of 5. Thank you.
Hey, this is Eric from IONCINEMA.com. If you want to support us, subscribe below. For more reviews, interviews, film festival coverage from Sundance, Cannes, Toronto, you want to check out these guys on this side.